Forming power from the personal to the political.
That's it. Right. It's a memorable title.
It is a memorable title. And Judy's been touring Canada talking about her book. Tell us what is the main premise of the book, please, Judy.
The main premise of the book is that there's change emerging all over the world, particularly in Latin America, the States, and Europe. That's developing in a different way than what we're accustomed to. You know, on the left, we've seen power as something located in the state and in capital, and we felt that if we could only take control of the state and have the right policies and the right people, we could change things for the better. And that hasn't worked out very well in too many countries. And so what's happening now, particularly in Latin America, is a different notion, a notion of building power, what I call transforming power from the bottom up. So even once left-wing governments come in, they understand that the only way change can really happen is to empower people at a local level, at a community level, to change their own lives, so that the state becomes much more a body that provides tools, training, resources to the local communities, and we have democracy, participatory democracy, a much deeper form of democracy than we have there. So what I've tried to do in the book is show examples of this, both in Latin America, in the United States, and in Europe. And when we come up further north, we also add to that a network politics, which works in a very similar way, where organizations that I'm looking at, like the Indigenous Environmental Network is one, work in the same way. Instead of being a representative organization where people are elected and speak for others, they go into communities, they provide the resources, the training, but the communities speak for themselves. So it's a trend that I see happening all over the world of a deeper democracy and a more decentralized way of creating change. And of course, in light of the economic and the environmental crises, we have to work more at a local level. And so what we're seeing is a kind of local global connection. People are connecting across the globe through networks, but they're working at a local level.
You call it a trend. Where did the trend start? When did it start? Where do you see it welling up from? And
well, I think the first sign of it to me, at least the first sign I saw, was in the participatory budget in Brazil, which started about 12 years ago in Porto Alegre. And there we saw that when ordinary citizens had the decision-making power to spend new money in the budget, it was transformative of them in terms of their participation in society, transformative of the government, really reduced corruption, and transformative in terms of the quality of the city. And so that's the first example we saw of it. But it's kind of emerging everywhere at the same time. Like, for example, one example of it that isn't very radical really is the slow food movement, which started in Italy. It's not a left-wing movement particularly, but it's about the right to have good food. And once they started talking about having good food, slow food as opposed to fast food, they didn't want the McDonald's in their town, then they started talking about making sure food producers got well compensated, using local food, you know, seeing themselves as co-producers rather than consumers of food, not seeing food as a commodity. And that movement links to movements here in Canada or in the States where we're doing farm to table, right? And people are much more interested in local food. So what I see in my book, in the research that I've done, is almost an entire food system, global food system, emerging as an alternative with very little government support, just people doing what they believe is right at a local level, and then connecting with others, usually online.
I was expecting, actually, you mentioned online, I was expecting you to bring in the technological aspect of this kind of bottom-up development. But the first couple of examples that you mentioned, slow food and the Brazilian people's budget, neither of them were driven by technology, were they?
No, they're not. That's what's interesting about it, is that what we see happening because of technology, let's say open source software, and the kind of organizing we see in Europe, which is based on technology and how people can connect through networks, is very similar to what's happening in places where they don't have access to the technology. And I think it comes from a sort of new era that we're coming into, where people don't trust representative democracy in the same way that they used to. They don't trust their betters to represent them.
I don't think they trust authorities, do they?
No, and they don't trust, that's right. They don't trust authorities, and they want to do things themselves. They think, you know, they have the confidence in that, and they trust each other and their neighbors and what their neighbors think. And so we see, that's what's fascinating in the work that I did in the book, is, you know, I was, as you know, from Rabble, I was very hooked into all the network politics stuff online, but it's happening offline now. And in the Obama campaign, we see a really interesting, what the Americans call scaling up of all of this, right? Because what Obama did online, there was really nothing new in it. He just had a lot more money, right? But what he did offline was what was most interesting, because he took that network politics ideas from the online organizing, and he applied it offline, which meant letting go at a local level, allowing people to do their own organizing, again, providing them with the tools, the information they need, not requiring a big commitment like joining the Democratic Party, and letting people organize. And that's very interesting. So they took the network politics online and applied it in an offline way, and obviously incredibly successfully.
That is very interesting. Now we're in a period of multiple crises. We have an economic crisis, we have an environmental crisis, we have a social crisis, we have an inequality crisis, we have so many crises. Food crisis, I forgot to mention, water crisis, one could add as well. How do we approach these crises using the kind of thinking, the kind of trend that you've been observing and studying and talking about?
Well, I think people are doing it. You know, if you looked at a reaction to the G20 in Europe, I mean, in Britain, we saw the broadest coalition that has ever been in England protesting the G20 under a banner that says capitalism isn't working. That was the front banner. I mean, it was amazing, 35,000 people marching behind that banner. And the solutions that people are putting forward are very similar. The problem is that, with the exception of Latin America, there's no government putting forward these kinds of solutions, right? So there's no government that's putting forward, you know, saying, let's say, really nationalize the banks so that we have a source of resources that we can provide to the community and really increase these kind of projects. So what we need is, you know, sort of similar to what Obama's doing on the green jobs thing, right? Where he took the green jobs ideas whole cloth from a movement that was really just forming over the last couple of years in the States. He's taken it whole cloth. He hired Van Jones, who I think is the most inspired leader of that movement. And you know, maybe they're really going to implement this. I don't know, you know, we're a little cynical about these things, but maybe they're really going to implement it. Well, we need that in other ways. In Italy, we see a lot of municipal governments going with the slow food, supporting the slow food movement, and now the slow tourism movement, too, is starting to emerge in Italy. Italy is a fascinating place for some of these projects. So I'm not sure, you know, I have to answer, I'm not sure. And this is part of the new politics, too, is that people like me have always thought we know the right path, you know? And I think it's not true anymore. It's going to emerge, and I have a lot of confidence. Things are going to get worse before they get better, but I have a lot of confidence if we can learn ourselves how to work in a different way, how to trust people more, how to give voice to people who have been on the margins up until now. I think that we'll find the solutions.
Finally, what exciting signs, trends, events, happenings do you see happening here in Canada and in Alberta, where we are today?
Well, you know, it's almost like we're all living in Alberta now under this government. But I think there's a few exciting things. There's some organizations like Food Share in Toronto and groups like them that are developing new food systems. There's here, I think, the new campaign that just got started by Parkland for green jobs. We're starting to see people learning from the Green Jobs campaign in the States. There's a big campaign in Ontario to extend EI that's being organized in a very grassroots way, in a networked way. So I see small signs in Canada. I think we're behind other places. The reason is because we resisted neoliberalism longer. And so we weren't as decimated as, let's say, they were in the States. And so we, you know, our old organizations still function a lot in the old ways. You know, our unions do, our social movements are either marginalized or they become very institutionalized, not very radical. And so, you know, we're starting from behind, but I think we'll catch up fast.